Welcome to our countdown of the world's most corrupt nations according to Transparency International. Now you might be thinking, Afonso, a corruption index? That sounds about as much fun as a prostate exam conducted by a bear with sandpaper paws. And you wouldn't be wrong to think that, but stick with me here, because believe it or not, this is important. We're talking about countries where corruption is so deeply ingrained, it's practically woven into the national fabric, like trying to get a ketchup stain out of your favorite shirt. It's going to take a lot more than a quick wash to fix this mess. We'll be taking a deep dive into the murky depths of global corruption, exposing the worst offenders, and hopefully shining a light on this very serious issue. So buckle up, grab your cynicism detectors, and let's get right to it. First up, we have Somalia, a country that consistently tops the corruption charts. Imagine a place where government officials treat public funds like their own personal piggy banks, where bribery is as commonplace as ordering a cup of coffee, and accountability is about as rare as a sober night out for Keith Richards. For decades, Somalia has been ravaged by conflict, poverty, and a lack of effective governance. This toxic cocktail has created a breeding ground for corruption, where powerful individuals and groups line their pockets while the majority of the population struggles to survive. It's like a real-life game of Monopoly, except the board is rigged, the bank is always empty, and everyone's playing by their own set of rules. The sad reality is that corruption in Somalia has become so deeply entrenched that it's hard to see a way out. It's a vicious cycle where corruption fuels instability, which in turn breeds more corruption, and the people of Somalia are the ones paying the price. Next, we travel to South Sudan, a nation birthed from conflict, only to find itself mired in further turmoil. Imagine a country so rich in oil, yet so impoverished by corruption that its citizens barely see a dime of the profits. Yeah, it's a real head-scratcher. Since gaining independence in 2011, South Sudan has been plagued by civil war and political instability. And you know what they say, when the cat's away, the corrupt officials will play. The ongoing conflict has created an environment where corruption thrives, with those in power exploiting the chaos for personal gain. It's like a scene from Mad Max, except instead of fighting over gasoline, they're fighting over who gets to control the oil wells. The result? A humanitarian crisis of epic proportions, with millions facing starvation and displacement, while the elite live lavish lifestyles funded by ill-gotten gains. It's a tragic reminder that corruption doesn't just steal resources, it steals lives. Chapter 3. Syria, war-torn and corruption-ridden. Our next stop takes us to Syria, a country ravaged by over a decade of brutal civil war. Imagine a place where the very fabric of society has been torn apart, where basic necessities are scarce, and where even the most fundamental human rights are routinely violated. Yeah, it's pretty bleak. The ongoing conflict has created a perfect storm for corruption, as the Assad regime and other armed groups exploit the chaos to enrich themselves. It's a classic case of never let a good crisis go to waste. Except in this case, the crisis is a humanitarian catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. From extortion and bribery to the theft of humanitarian aid, corruption has become endemic in Syria. It's a heartbreaking situation where those who have already lost so much are being further victimized by the greed and corruption of those in power. Chapter 4. Yemen, a breeding ground for corruption. Moving on, we arrive in Yemen, a nation grappling with one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Imagine a country on the brink of famine, where millions are struggling to survive and where every single day is a fight for basic necessities. Now imagine that on top of all that, corruption is running rampant, exacerbating the suffering of the Yemeni people. Years of conflict have decimated Yemen's infrastructure, crippled its economy, and fueled widespread corruption. It's a tragic case of robbing Peter to pay Paul, except in this case, Peter is starving, and Paul is a corrupt official living large off stolen funds. From the misappropriation of aid money to the manipulation of food prices, corruption in Yemen has become a death sentence for countless innocent civilians. It's a stark reminder that corruption thrives in times of crisis, preying on the most vulnerable and pushing them further into the abyss of despair. Chapter 5. Venezuela, from riches to rags. And finally, we arrive in Venezuela, a country that was once a beacon of prosperity in Latin America, now teetering on the brink of collapse. Imagine a nation blessed with vast oil reserves, yet where people are forced to scavenge for food in the trash. It's like finding out that winning lottery ticket you thought would solve all your problems was actually a very elaborate prank. Years of economic mismanagement, coupled with rampant corruption and authoritarian rule, have brought Venezuela to its knees. It's a cautionary tale of how corruption can erode even the most promising of nations, leaving behind a trail of economic devastation and human suffering. From rigged elections and the suppression of dissent to the embezzlement of billions of dollars in oil revenue, corruption has become deeply ingrained in Venezuela's political and economic systems. It's a tragic example of how unchecked greed and abuse of power can transform a once thriving nation into a cautionary tale for the world. Chapter 6. The High Cost of Corruption. So, there you have it, a glimpse into the dark underbelly of global corruption. These 5 countries unfortunately represent just the tip of the iceberg. Corruption is a global scourge that affects nations rich and poor, developed and developing. It's a betrayal of public trust, a theft from the most vulnerable, and a major obstacle to progress and development. But the fight against corruption is not hopeless. By shedding light on this issue, by holding the corrupt accountable, and by demanding transparency and good governance, we can make a difference. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insightful content.